can't happen here. It can't happen here. I'm telling you, my dear, that it can happen here. Because I've been checking it out.
But and neither do I know how much of the coverage you watched yesterday of the inquiry, the unfolding inquiry into the Capitol riot, or how much of the background you know. And that's part of my point this morning. Relatively recently, you'd have known arguably more about the latest machinations in American politics than you would about the British equivalents, the British counterparts, we spoke to Simon Marks every other minute, and not just on this programme, of course, and we should be doing so again, I think. And you would know details about what the latest situation was with regards to families being split up at the border, many of whom still to be reunited, the absolutely weapons-grade lies that were coming out of the White House and being amplified and not challenged by swathes, by Fox News and other fellow travellers, and the genuine sense of fear that some of us felt about the clearly fascistic direction in which his government was moving. Except, I say, some of us felt, because I would call it fascistic, and once again, no pleasure at all to be derived from having been proved 157% correct. I would call it fascistic, and other people would call me hysterical. So, or of course, and some of them are still around, still bobbing around like unflushable excrement in the British media. Some of them were massive cheerleaders for him and yet remain in place even after the events of January the 6th. And I'm genuinely baffled by it. I'm also a little bit ashamed, I think, because I couldn't really look you in the eye and tell you why we've looked away. That's what I mean by being a seagull rather than a trawler. Obviously, the lack of proper coverage across much of the British media has, by a process, if you like, of intellectual osmosis, has turned me off the tale or turned me off the story. That's perhaps the less charitable reading. That's me being a little bit harsh on myself. The more charitable reading might be that it's actually still quite frightening to properly address. America is our closest cousin. That's my view. You may not agree with it, but I think it's supported most obviously by language and clearly by history as well. We are, however, very different countries, very different cultures. I think it was Oscar Wilde who said two countries divided by a common language, which is a sort of beautifully loaded phrase, isn't it? And yet, I think most of us think there's a special relationship, and most of us are conscious of the fact that modern America was born from both British colonies and, of course, the rejection of British rule during the War of Independence. And that's why I find it really frightening. There's that phrase that pops up all the time during these contemplations, and it's a rather splendid book called "It Couldn't Happen Here." The point of which, of course, is to remind us that it could actually happen anywhere. You think of, we've had fascist governments, fascist overthrows, fascist coups pretty close to home. I think one thinks, I suppose, of Franco, Mussolini, the generals in Greece. These are southern European countries. Has there been a northern European equivalent? There was Quisling in Norway. There was the Nazis, I suppose, most obviously. So the idea that it somehow couldn't happen here, being a British and American arrogance, is possibly shaken so profoundly by the clear evidence that it could, that we run away, we look away. 7 minutes after 10 is the time. So that's what I want to talk about today, but I am really going to need your help, because the backdrop to this inquiry is that the Republicans are in almost unbelievable levels of denial about it. You saw what happened on January the 6th. A mob of, certainly a significant contingent of whom were white supremacist terrorists, was incited to attack the Capitol with a clear intent of killing the Vice President Mike Pence by the now former President of the United States of America, Donald Trump. That's question number one. Is it simply saying that out loud? Because I can feel it a little bit myself. I say those words out loud, and a part of me goes, whoa, let's shut that door. Sound like Larry Grayson then, I do apologise. Let's close that box. Seriously, no, let's not go there. What's the word I'm looking for? Is there a psychological description for this? It's almost too terrible to contemplate. So, you glance across the Atlantic, you think Joe Biden, well, he seems like a nice fella. He's quite old, but he seems to have all his marbles, despite the best efforts of racist liars in the media who love Donald Trump to pretend otherwise. Oh, let's just talk about him. He's not doing great stuff. Not so sure about the Afghan policies or some other areas of what he's doing. He needs to get a handle on that. But my God, thank God we don't have to talk about Donald Trump anymore, because liberal people found it frightening that fascism was on the march once again, and people with fascist sympathies found it absolutely thrilling. So they don't want to talk about it because it is, well, what? I don't know. I mean, like looking in a mirror and saying, good God, I was cheering for a fascist after all. And very few of them are prepared to own that position. They prefer to pretend that they weren't. And those of us who were calling it fascism from day one, well, we'd rather look away because we don't really want it to be true, even though it's been proven incontrovertibly so. So that's question number one. I say those words out loud. A terrorist mob was unleashed upon the Capitol by the president. And you say, yeah, let's not talk about that, James. Let's talk about parking tickets instead. Because it makes our existence feel fragile? I don't know. And coronavirus might be part of the answer to the question. I think you've probably already realised this is going to be one of those mornings where I do go rather round the houses before inviting you to hop into the back of my shower bank. The coronavirus has shaken our sense of certainty and solidity. Well, it has me, at least. I feel a lot more fragile. My existence feels a lot more fragile than it did before. It's like an act of God, isn't it? It's like a plague or a massive flood, something biblical that shakes your certainty or shakes your sense of self. Crikey, things are a lot less safe than I thought they were. You get it with coups, you get it with military action, but again, in this country, we haven't really had anything like that. So it takes something like a pandemic that we were, clearly ill prepared for, and clearly politically it's been handled very, very badly, but it still shakes society, civilization, humanity down to its boots, down to its very foundations. So is that part of the reason why we're so tempted to look away from what happened in America and what is now being both examined, thank God, but also denied? Because that's the other bit. I don't think it's over. 2024, if he runs again, God knows what foul forces he'll be able to marshal. You've got significant swathes of the country, not just the headbangers, who are either believing or pretending to believe the massive lie about him having won last year's election. There's people in this country who believe it. They're usually very quick to start texting in whenever Sadiq Khan is in the studio. I can't imagine what it is that explains that conflation of phenomena. So why don't you want to talk about Donald Trump? Or more specifically, about what happened on January the 6th? I'm trying to work out why I don't, but I think that's the question I'm asking you. Or why is the world looking away? Challenge me on this. Tell me that they're not looking away, that there hasn't been a huge drop-off, or that at least the huge drop-off is comprehensible. It makes perfect sense. Well, he's not in charge anymore. Because I'm fairly confident, and this is where I am overreaching, perhaps, but I always speak from the heart. So if I'm wrong, I'm wrong, but I'm wrong by accident. I'm wrong in a sincere way. If this had happened in countries that were not our closest allies, if this had happened in France, wouldn't we be all over it? Wouldn't we be, if there'd been an actual terrorist attack by a mob of people supporting an ousted president, seeking to kill his own vice president, terrifying the forces of law and order and the elected representatives. They attacked the French Parliament and nearly, this is what's emerging in the inquiry, they attacked the French Parliament and nearly did terrible, terrible things. They believed that they were acting on the president's instructions, the ousted president's instructions. I suppose I'm suggesting that this is a hugely historic event, and we are treating it a little bit like a minor event at the Olympics. Hit the numbers now, you will get through. 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. Why? And I'm just going to play you some of the stuff that's been emerging These are some police officers who've been giving evidence to the inquiry, right? If you've not been following events, that's fine. I mean, part of the reason we're having this conversation is I think we all should be. You've got police officers telling you what happened, okay? And I want you to tell me why you think this is not a bigger deal. I haven't got a more complicated way of phrasing it than that. Okay, so this is, first up, Officer Harry Dunn.
More and more insurrectionists were pouring into the area by the speaker's lobby near the rotunda, and some wearing MAGA hats and shirts that said Trump 2020. I told them to just leave the Capitol, and in response they yelled, "No, man, this is our house. President Trump invited us here. We're here to stop the steal. Joe Biden is not the president. Nobody voted for Joe Biden." I'm a law enforcement officer, and I do my best to keep politics out of my job. But in this circumstance, I responded, "Well, I voted for Joe Biden. Does my vote not count? Am I nobody?" That prompted a torrent of racial epithets. One woman in a pink MAGA shirt yelled, "You hear that, guys? This nigger voted for Joe Biden." Then the crowd, perhaps around 20 people, joined in screaming, "Boo!" No one had ever called me a nigger while wearing the uniform of a Capitol Police officer. In the days following the attempted insurrection, other Black officers shared with me their own stories of racial abuse on January 6th.
The N-word, obviously, was the one you couldn't hear. And I sent shivers down my spine, that. Partly, I think, because it happened, so nearly happened here. That's what I mean by America being our closest cousin. You don't have to agree with that bit, but certainly we know a hell of a lot more about America in the United Kingdom than we do about any other country, any other foreign country. So, and I'll play some more testimony from these officers. I'll remind you that the Republican Party is refusing to participate in large part with this inquiry. And I'll remind you also that Republican politicians are still queuing up for Donald Trump's endorsements, despite the fact that he incited a white supremacist terror attack upon the American equivalent of the Parliament. I'm not going nuts, am I? This is a really, really big deal. And therefore it is a really, really important question that I'm asking you. Why are so many of us looking away? Why are we treating this with less importance than we did, the colour of his skin, the weird orange hue that he elected to adopt? More testimony from more police officers, a little from me, but hopefully rather more from you. One of those mornings, I think, where every answer to the question I'm asking is valid, even the ones I don't particularly like or want to reflect upon. Phil in Northampton sums it up when he says the only reason I can think of that the attempted insurrection has not received the coverage it should have done is because the UK is sadly on the same path. I don't agree with that, but I can't prove you wrong, can I? Let's hear a little more testimony from officers who were on duty that day when, and I'm going to say it again, I'm going to say it quite a few times in the course of the programme, so if you don't like it, consider yourself warned. A white supremacist terrorist mob attacked the Capitol, the American equivalent of the Parliament, at the behest of the ousted President Donald Trump, who remains the most powerful figure in the Republican Party and whose lies about last year's election are being amplified and taken up by a few crackpots who genuinely believe them and by a much, much larger number of important and senior politicians who are pretending that he's telling the truth in order to protect their own power and position. This is Officer Michael Fanone.
What makes the struggle harder and more painful is to know so many of my fellow citizens, including so many of the people I put my life at risk to defend, are downplaying or outright denying what happened. I feel like I went to hell and back to protect them and the people in this room. But too many are now telling me that hell doesn't exist or that hell actually wasn't that bad. The indifference shown to my colleagues is disgraceful. My law enforcement career prepared me to cope with some of the aspects of this experience. Being an officer, you know your life is at risk whenever you walk out the door. even if you don't expect otherwise law-abiding citizens to take up arms against you. But nothing, truly nothing, has prepared me to address those elected members of our government who continue to deny the events of that day, and in doing so, betray their oath of office.
Officer Fanoni was the second officer to testify. He was beaten unconscious and suffered a heart attack. His weapon was stolen by rioters chanting, "Kill him with his own gun." As you heard, he was beaten, tasered, called a traitor to his country, electrocuted again and again with a taser. "I'm sure I was screaming," he said, "but I don't think I could hear even my own voice." And the Republican Party is not supporting this inquiry. Now I'd like you to listen to Police Sergeant Aquilino Gonell, okay? And then we'll start trying together to answer the question of why, when we picked over every dot and comma of Donald Trump's presidency, why have we shut our eyes to all of this?
The rioters called me a traitor, a disgrace, and shouted that I, an Army veteran and a police officer, should be executed. Some of the rioters had the audacity to tell me there was nothing personal, that they would go through me, through us, police officers, to achieve their goal, as they were breaking metal barriers to use as a weapon against us. Or they use more menacing language. If you shoot us, we all have weapons, we will shoot back. Or we'll get our guns, we outnumber you. They said, join us. I heard specific threats to the lives of Speaker Nancy Pelosi and then also Vice President Mike Pence. But the physical violence we experienced was horrific and devastating. My fellow officers and I were punched, kicked, shoved, sprayed with chemical irritants, and even blinded with eye-damaging lasers by a violent mob, who apparently saw us, law enforcement officers, dedicated to ironically protecting them as U.S. citizens, as an impediment to their attempted insurrection. The mob brought weapons to try to accomplish their insurrectionist objectives and use them against us. These weapons included hammers, rebars, knives, baton, and police shields taken by force, as well as bear spray and pepper spray. Some of the rioters wore tactical gear, including bulletproof vests and gas masks. The rioter also forcibly took out batons and shields to use them against us. I was particularly shocked at seeing the insurrectionists violently attack us with the very American flag that they claim to sought to protect.
That's probably for me the hardest bit to process, is the knowledge that they risk their lives every day to protect politicians who are downplaying or denying, or in the case of Matt Gaetz and Marjorie Taylor Greene, mounting protests outside the inquiry, demanding answers about the treatment of what they call the January the 6th prisoners. You're going to work every day knowing you might not come home, something that all members of the emergency services are familiar with, but I'm certainly not. You might not come home. Sometimes I see the guards that are in the building when somebody like Boris Johnson is here, or Sadiq Khan. I can't process it. The idea that they would throw themselves in front of a bullet that's aimed at a politician. That's what these men do every day. That's what they're prepared to do every day. And the politicians now, Donald Trump's most ardent admirers and supporters, are, well, you've heard what they've got to say. Finally, Officer Daniel Hodges.
They didn't say anything especially xenophobic to me, but to my black colleagues and anyone who's not white. And some of them would try to recruit me. One of them came up to me and said, "Are you my brother?" There are many known organizations with ties to white supremacy who had a presence there. I know, like 3%ers, Oath Keepers, that kind of thing. And everyone I've ever people who associate with Donald Trump are find more likely to subscribe to that kind of belief system.
And I don't know whether it was him or another officer giving evidence who came prepared with the use of the word terrorist and had the receipts to explain why that was precisely the correct word to use. So please don't waste tenpence texting me pretending not to understand why. What I want you to do is call me and tell me why is... Someone's already suggested, I like this, from Mandeep, America would bomb a country back to the Stone Age if they saw something similar unfolding there. I don't know if that's true. It's certainly a thought-provoking contribution. If this was happening in another country, America often takes upon itself to impose democracy, right? You don't need examples. They're tripping off your tongue quite happily. So how come when it happened in America, the rest of the world, most obviously for our purposes this morning, the UK, looked away? David's in Chiswick. David, what do you reckon?
David's not in Chiswick. David's Ely. David left Chiswick and did a runner, but that's by the by.
Well, you're equally welcome. Ely's, I've lived there as well, would you believe? So anyway, we digress slightly. Carry on.
I think, James, for me personally, I'm scared. I'm scared to my core. We're brought up in a Western democracy where we're told that by and large, if things are going shockingly badly, we have the ballot box and we can find a solution. And, you know, I used to be an avid listener and watcher of CNN. Don't watch it once Trump started doing his evil stuff. It was just too depressing.
Well, a lot of people did. I mean, their ratings went through the roof, which might contain part of the answer to, not the answer you're providing, but other answers to the question that I'm asking.
Well, maybe, and it's the same, you know, if you look at what's gone on, we had Trump and people were clearly unable to do anything about it. We had the pandemic, and for the first time we've had to face an illness where science can't actually do anything about it, or at least it couldn't until the vaccines were around. And now we've got a big contingent of people that refuse to take the vaccine. You and I can't do anything realistically to stop that.
Why are we not covering the January the 6th insurrection and the unfolding inquiry? Why isn't it everywhere in the way that if Trump broke wind, it felt like the British media would be queuing up to describe the aroma?
I think because we're scared. I think we're scared of facing what it actually means.
It's hugely lucrative to terrify people, usually. That you know, selling tickets for the ghost train's a lot more profitable than selling tickets for the Speak Your Weight machine.
Yeah.
So why is it?
Don't know why.
Nor do I.
Why are we letting our own government get away with blue murder?
Well, again, you're just steering away from the question that I'm asking. I don't mean to sound impatient, because you may be right that it is all of a piece, but I can only pick one piece at a time. And the piece I've picked this morning is this. I'm pretty confident of two things. If this was happening in another country, America, at various points in history, would have taken it upon itself to intervene, certainly if it had escalated further. And number two, we covered every dot and comma of the Trump presidency as if it was the single most important thing on the planet. For people who were comfortable with his fascism and his racism, and those of us who weren't. And yet this is almost as if we're just hoping if we ignore it, we might be able to persuade ourselves that it never happened. Or a third way into the programme today would be to say that there's nothing, James, seriously, mate, it's not as bad as you think. This is perfectly normal. Why would we report it? He's ousted, he's out. I don't quite get that yet, but I'd love to hear an explanation or a defence of that position. I've got a theory of my own developing as we continue to ask this question of why we seem to be looking away from not just the events of January the 6th in America, but also the unfolding inquiry. It's a bit self-serving, though, so I'll keep it in the fridge for a little bit longer. Here is Officer Daniel Hodges addressing, just in case there's anybody honest, questioning the use of the word terrorist in this context, which, to be honest with you, I doubt. I don't think there is any. And if you're a massive racist with sympathies for these terrorists, then you're going to be uncomfortable with the word terrorist. If they'd opened fire on a Black Lives Matter protest, you'd probably be dancing around the town square high-fiving each other. So I don't waste too much time worrying about you. But just in case anybody honest is unclear about the vocabulary's relevance, here is one of the officers who came under attack that day.
But I can see why someone would take issue with the title of terrorist. It's gained a lot of notoriety in our vocabulary in the past few decades. And we like to believe that, no, that couldn't happen here. No domestic terrorism, no homegrown threats. But I came prepared. U.S. Code, Title 18, Part 1, Chapter 113, B as in Brown, Section 2331. The term domestic terrorism means activities that involve acts dangerous to human life that are a violation of the criminal laws of the United States or of any state, and B, appear to be intended to intimidate or coerce a civilian population, or to influence the policy of a government by intimidation or coercion, or to affect the conduct of a government by mass destruction, assassination, or kidnapping, and occur primarily within the territorial jurisdiction of the United States.
So I'm glad we cleared that up. That was Officer Daniel Hodges, one of the police officers who came under attack from domestic terrorists incited by Donald Trump on January the 6th in Washington. Why did those words upset you so much? I mean, apart from the obvious answer, which is, damn it, they didn't win. I'm on their side. Angus is in Hornsey. Angus, what's going on?
Well, my two little strands of theory are, one, that most of the people involved in the riot were white.
What's that got to do with the price of tea?
I think it doesn't fit the narrative for white people to be terrorists. They're normally other people. There was an exception with Irish people when I was growing up, but you can't really other. How do you other your own people?
So it is almost too bitter a pill to swallow, so they're not even going to try. Because remember, you're talking about people I know. I mean, the decision makers in newspapers and broadcasting companies. It could be subconscious, I suppose, but I'm fairly confident no one is consciously saying, let's not go all in on this. But then you're going to come back at me and say, what got more coverage? The BLM riots, which were not incited by a president, or the January the 6th riots, which were? How can anybody argue that the ones incited by the president are not more important than the ones that weren't incited by any mainstream politician? So, yeah, all right, that stands. I don't like it, obviously, but I can't refute it. What's number two?
The other thing that relates to what the clip you just played. I was thinking it before the clip was played. The definition of terrorist in the media narrative has always been, a foreigner or someone in another country or someone in another ethnic group.
Yeah, although we're quite comfortable going to bomb Afghanistan because the Taliban is fighting the government and they're all Afghans.
Yeah.
So just that idea, I suppose we're balking here at even the vague implication that what the people on January the 6th, the American equivalent of the Taliban, aren't we? And possibly people aren't ready to go there. I mean, it may not even be a fair comparison.
That's how it feels to me.
Yeah, it is one of those conversations. Thank you, Angus. Everyone having a crack at this, but I mean, I don't think anyone's going to go definitive, are they? It's not Thursday afternoon. What are your qualifications? I'm the Secretary of State. But it is, the more we talk about it, the more confident I am it's a really important question. Just because we might not be able to answer it completely doesn't detract in any way, shape or form from its importance. Arguably, it does the opposite. What's going on? I think, what was the most trivial thing we reported on with Trump? It's something really silly, like him cheating at golf, right? That got quite a lot of coverage. What about actual events? When he didn't go to the war graves because it was raining? Yeah, how much coverage did that get? Now he's incited a terrorist attack on the Capitol. It's getting less coverage, even as the officers who were targeted are telling you what happened and telling us how it unfolded. Not criticising anybody yet, well, except the terrorists, but I don't get it, and I want to. I want to get a slightly better grasp, and all of the answers we've heard so far are moving into the space available. None of them have excluded themselves by sounding unbelievable or ridiculous. They're uncomfortable and horrible, especially the claim that the British media isn't all over this because the British government is heading in the same direction. I don't want to believe that, but I'm certainly going to not stop you from saying it. I believe in freedom of speech, unlike the people who set up special organisations to protect freedom of speech, or indeed their own TV stations, and then fire people for taking a knee to protect freedom of speech. So maybe there are signs that we're heading in similar directions. The biggest cheerleader Donald Trump had in this country now works for a television station that sacks people for expressing themselves freely. Yeah, You do the maths. Richard is in Leicester. Richard, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. How's it going?
I'm going to take that as a rhetorical question. I'm getting more spooked with every call, to be honest with you, Richard. But go on, carry on.
I think actually you've just kind of alluded to the point that I was going to make by using the word silly in terms of what's being reported about Donald Trump during his presidency.
Yeah.
I think part of the problem is, especially in sort of the right-wing media in this country, we've kind of turned Donald Trump during his presidency into some kind of cartoon villain.
Right.
Where we do report on the silly things that he says, or the fact that his suit is too big, or his hair looks a bit silly, or he looks a bit old as he's walking onto a train, or he doesn't hold an umbrella for his wife. But they're all things that we can laugh at and we can feel superior at.
And we almost got stuck into those more than we did, the separation of families at the border and the really vile stuff that was being done on his watch as well, because it's easier to hang your hat on the silly stuff, right, than the sinister stuff.
Absolutely, and even with the children at the border, the thing that I saw most in the news was, and I can't remember exactly what it says, but Melania Trump wore a shirt that had a slogan on it.
Yeah, I don't care, or something like that. I really don't care. I forget what it was.
And that's the thing that I saw most in the news, not the fact that there were, thousands, hundreds of thousands of children separated from their parents. It was Melania Trump has worn a T-shirt with a slogan on it. And I think it's really scary, because I think the fact that Boris Johnson is our Prime Minister shows that we're kind of going the same way in this country.
I mean, normally I wouldn't be too bothered about you saying that. I may even have said similar things myself. But did you hear him this morning on the breakfast show? Did you hear him being interviewed?
I didn't, no.
That's okay. Well, I mean, he didn't come across like a Donald Trump in waiting. Really? Do you really buy that? I mean, I bought it at times, and there'll be times when I don't. Right now, I don't think he would ever incite a terrorist attack upon the House of Commons. Come on.
I should raise what I meant. I think that the fact that I don't think that Boris Johnson is anywhere near as dangerous as Donald Trump is, but I think the fact that he's Prime Minister, he got to where he is because he said what some people thought of were funny things in the media. He made an appearance on Have I Got News for You? He has silly hair. And we've kind of... The fact that he has got to a position where he's now Prime Minister of the country, it doesn't seem to be based on qualifications or anything that he's qualified to do, because he's absolutely not qualified to do the job. It's the fact that people liked him because...
So we're not covering it properly for fear, and I use we very loosely, very, very generically to describe the bulk of the heritage media, for fear that the story might look like a mirror.
Yeah. That's what I think.
Yeah. Well, as I said, I haven't got the qualifications to refute any of these suggestions. I'd add to it the self-serving bit that I've kept in the fridge for at least 10 minutes. Well done, me. Which is, if you were buying into the both sidesism of it, right? If I'll allow myself one little moment of self-reference. I had to leave the BBC in order to call Donald Trump a fascist. And just because I've been proved right doesn't mean I can go back. But all of the media organisations that said, and now we'll speak to Sebastian Gorka, do you remember him? And now we'll speak to so-and-so. Now we'll continue to treat this man as if he's just like all the other politicians in the free world, but a little bit more eccentric and a bit more orange. If you did that, and now we'll speak to someone from Republicans for America who's going to tell you why Donald Trump is really a misunderstood genius and a stand-up guy. Now you've seen, I think this is subconscious in this line of work. Now that you've seen the absolute incontrovertible evidence that he was every bit as disgusting and as despicable as some of us said with evidence, you can't really now report honestly on the aftermath of the thing you spent 4 years pretending wasn't true. Could that be it? Everyone else is having a go at filling the space available. Could that be it? Every single outlet in the country was booking people who were under the impression, to be generous, that Donald Trump wasn't a disgusting and dangerous human being. Now that we know that he was, didn't he say, I love these guys, about the ones that we've just heard described by the officers they attacked? Is that it? The media just can't. Something broke during the coverage, during the attempt to do equivalence or balance. Something snapped, something broke beyond repair. So now you can't really go back without addressing the question of how the hell you failed to see what he was when everybody else was telling you? I don't know. It's just a thought. Feel free to challenge it, or indeed, if you want, you can agree with it. So, I mean, pick your favourite answer to the question. There's not going to be one that fits all parts of it. I do think the temptation to look away rather than to do what we're doing now and dig into it, work it out. I think that's quite a big part of it. And I think I felt it most keenly during Officer Michael Fanone's testimony, a brief minute of which I shall play you again now, because I want you to sort of taste that idea that I've had in the last 24 hours. Part of the reason why, we'd cover everything from his golf swing to his wife's shoes, but his deliberate inciting of a terrorist attack upon the Capitol, it's as if we can't. I sometimes talk to you about, sometimes some mountains are so huge you pretend they're not there, because the alternative would be to start wondering about how the hell you're ever going to climb it. So here is one of the officers on duty at the Capitol on January the 6th and here's another little phrase that might surprise you. Well, have a listen.
What makes the struggle harder and more painful is to know so many of my fellow citizens, including so many of the people I put my life at risk to defend, are downplaying or outright denying what happened. I feel like I went to hell and back to protect them and the people in this room. But too many are now telling me that hell doesn't exist, or that hell actually wasn't that bad. The indifference shown to my colleagues is disgraceful. My law enforcement career prepared me to cope with some of the aspects of this experience. Being an officer, you know your life is at risk whenever you walk out the door, even if you don't expect otherwise law-abiding citizens to take up arms against you. But nothing, truly nothing, has prepared me to address those elected members of our government who continue to deny the events of that day, and in doing so, betray their oath of office.
I'm not pulling any punches, but neither is he saying anything extraordinary in the context of what actually happened and what is still happening. And do you know why I sort of swallowed my words a bit at the beginning there? Because I said the words, and then I was about to go, this year, and then even my own brain went, are you sure it was this year? And that's me pushing it so far away from my consciousness that I just entertained the possibility that it was actually last year. This happened 6 months ago. And I don't understand why it is not being talked about with anything like the urgency or the importance that it would have been if it had happened in China or France or Russia or almost anywhere else. And I guess part of the answer has to be how much of the UK media was complicit in treating Donald Trump like a valid politician rather than a disgusting aberration from all that democracies and indeed America is supposed to stand for. God. 10:52 is the time. Johnny's in Peckham. Johnny, what do you reckon?
Hi, James. We've talked before. Thank you so much for taking my call.
You're very welcome.
Two things. One is that there's an ease these days about yes/no politics, the easy answers, and that's not been that long that we actually had better reporting. I do find, I hate to say this because I'm speaking to LBC, but I do find on LBC this is where we're getting the depth. I'm not just trying to be ingratiating here, where people are actually asking hard questions that don't have easy answers.
Thank you.
There's a form of gesture politics that are going on that's not on the left, or maybe it is on the left on some level, but it's really very much carried through with the Tories, with the Priti Patel and the police thing and whatever else is going on. But when you ask yourself the question, when we all ask ourselves the question, how come people aren't acknowledging the insanity of what happened, the negativity of what happened? Ask yourself, why are there still Holocaust deniers after they've seen the images? It's not because they don't see it. They do see it. It's because there's this view, I think, that there is there are two sides to every problem. And that's not correct. There is a truth, and the truth is that there was an insurrection. It's not that there was an insurrection in the minds of somebody else. There was an insurrection, and it did go against the law, not just a rule. And so one has to ask themselves the question, how come we have the predominance of gesture politics being claimed against a group that's trying to tell the truth, but in fact is being operated by those that are trying to shield the truth.
Well, at risk of invoking Godwin's law, Goebbels covered that, didn't he? He said the best way to deal with that is just to accuse the other side of doing exactly what it is that you're doing.
And to distract, to try and distract, to disorganize, and then just speak loudly. This kind of thing. And so I just wanted to just throw that in.
Yeah, well, it's got to be part of it. And that also explains media coverage, because even quite big name media organisations went down the road you describe. I think possibly inevitably, Johnny, I have to tell you, you can't get too self-congratulatory about this. You sit in these meetings and you realise the vocabulary needed to properly report on Donald Trump didn't exist. It was as if the language we'd all learned, the language of news, never accommodated the possibility. And you could say the American Constitution fell into the same trap. It never actually acknowledged or accommodated the possibility of somebody so disgusting rising to such prominence. And when they got there, we still were playing the same tunes, or we were still trying to slot him into the same established formats, which meant that you ended up saying, and now on the other hand here's somebody to defend the indefensible, because if we don't do that, we might be falling foul of Ofcom rules.
May I just add two small other points? One is that because there's this attempt to have an easy answer, I mean, I was asked to speak to some students in LA. They were young students who are, homeless, and there's an academy that's giving them a chance to grow. And I was asked not to speak too complicated. But I had to say things that they would, quote, understand, where I was talking about artificial intelligence and whatever. And so I thought, no, I'm going to tell them the complications of how this works. They really loved the thing. I'm not saying that because I did it. It's because there's the view, it's the nanny state, but it's the nanny state not connected to welfare. It's the nanny state connected to this false sense that people don't have the abilities to think.
It's a poverty of expectation.
Poverty of expectations, absolutely. Absolutely.
But it also works. It's lucrative. So if you treat people as if they are stupid, then if that's part of it. It also works. It's humiliating. It's you can just close people down. But just to also say this one last point, which is that in Belarusia and other places where there have been terrible uprisings, there is no reporting to it. So it's not that if it happened in a different country, we would be all over it. It is happening in other countries. Yeah, you're quite right. Well, I was thinking of France, if it happened somewhere like that, then I'm fairly clear. Well, I don't know. And hopefully we'll never find out. I want to make that absolutely clear. First, for the benefit of allowing us to make a more valid comparison. Johnny, thank you so much. Corpsey says, how do you start a conversation about police being attacked by people waving Blue Lives Matter flags, James? That could be as simple as that, couldn't it? Part of the answer to this. How do you start a conversation about something that he describes as sheer insanity, and hypocrisy of it makes it difficult to report in a clear and understandable fashion? Especially if you're still beholden to this ludicrous model by which you would then say, and now I'd like to invite my next guest on who is here to defend what happened. Except you couldn't do that. Penny drop moment. That's why it got denied. So that's why you now invite people on, and it's why people like Marjorie Taylor Greene and Matt Gaetz in America are just denying that it happened. That's what Harry Dunn, Michael Fanone was talking about. These people that we protect, we risk our lives to protect, they're saying that we were in hell that day, and they're telling us that hell didn't exist, because you can't balance it out. You can't say, oh no, actually on the other hand they had a point. Even the very fine people on both sides argument doesn't work here, because here it is, because the footage is so incontrovertible, the evidence is so clear. So you can't do what Trump did after one of his Nazi supporters killed a woman by driving a car at her and say there were very fine people on both sides. You can't dress it up as false equivalence or alternative facts. It's there. It's unfolded live on television. White supremacist terrorists loyal to the ousted president attacked the Capitol with the avowed ambition of killing the vice president. How the hell are you ever going to balance that out? How can you invite somebody onto the program to say, well, it wasn't as bad as the other gentleman is making it out? You can't. So from Goebbels to Orwell, straight away, the only way you can process this is by denying that it happened. Ignore the evidence of your eyes and ears. It was the party's final, most terrible command. Okay, so that explains why supporters would do it. That explains why particularly rancid Republicans would do it, and particularly pathetic Republicans would do it. One of George W. Bush's nephews has been trying to get an endorsement from Donald Trump in the last couple of weeks and has failed, which on the one hand is funny, but it's also terrifying because, you know, the Bush family, for all their failings, at least represented a period of American politics that made sense of sorts. And to see their latest scion seeking the approval of a man who's rubbished every aspect of normal, sensible, rational politics is chilling. It's a recognition of the power he still holds. But why would the media not be filling their boots with this stuff? What are they frightened of? I struggle to talk, says this texter, about January the 6th, etc., because when I try to explain to my husband, who doesn't follow current affairs, I feel I sound mad, like some kind of conspiracy theorist. When I say that I feel American democracy itself was at risk and there was an insurrection, it makes me feel like I'm the mad one and possibly overreacting. Well, I hope we've managed to keep you company today. And I'm told that, I mean, you don't need me to tell you which television so-called station in America it would be, but some of their presenters have been mocking and maligning these officers in what Julian Suffolk describes as some of the most sickening performative bile I've ever seen. But what else can they do? So that's your cheerleaders. What can they do? They either take the mickey or just pretend it never happened. Full denial. I get that, right? I even understand why Republican politicians who know that Trump is lying about the election result are still taking a knee, metaphorically speaking. And they can't admit the reality of what happened on January the 6th because it would be admitting the reality of themselves. It's fascinating. And then, of course, you move on to the more difficult question of why it's not getting reported properly. We'll stay with this for a little bit longer, and then there's quite a lot to get through today. I'm fascinated by Simone Biles, the American gymnast, and by the Michael Gove's latest intervention on the coronavirus vaccine. But I know this is one we could talk about for 3 hours. We're never going to go definitive, are we? We're never going to hit a point. I had a proper penny drop moment at the end of the last hour, but we're never going to go, oh yeah, that's it now. That's chapter and verse on why a British media that reported every dot and comma of Donald Trump's presidency has stayed largely or strangely quiet about the terrorist attack he incited on the Capitol. Ned's in Colchester. Ned, what would you like to say?
Yeah, hi James. Nice to have you on the show. Thanks very much. I think, I think Johnny from Peckham kind of made much of the point that I was going to make earlier in terms of kind of how it was reported and what's gone on. And my overarching feeling, I think, now is, what is left to report? Because through this, this roller coaster that we've been strapped onto, for all those years, and what it was like. I mean, I've been listening to shows, for ages, going, absolutely, that, of course. And I think at the time, the thing that concerned me was how the media would report things anyway. I just felt they were always kind of looking at their shoes. I was always sort of thinking, wake up, like he says something outrageous on Monday.
Yeah.
We sort of, jaws hit the floor.
We got inured to it.
Yeah, did he really say that?
Yeah.
The time they kind of got their thought processes together, well, how do we get this out? As you were just discussing, really, By Tuesday, that comes out. And he said something even worse on Wednesday. By the time we get to Friday, we don't even know what the day it's gone, and he's done another thing. So I always thought that was kind of like, guys, come on. It's a game, this. I mean, this...
Okay.
It's so many slaps, it's a round of applause.
And so we've just reached a saturation point? Is that what you're saying?
I think so. And I think now that...
Well, what did you feel when I played the clips of the officers?
I mean, it was absolutely tragic. And it's the thing about it is America has... I mean, I was saying to your producer, I mean, Jesus, imagine if he'd got back in.
Yes.
Right? I mean, I don't know about you, but...
I think he would have done if it wasn't for the virus, actually. We'll never know. It's a counterfactual, but I think he would have done.
I mean, the roller coaster that we've been on, and I found this personally, and this is just a personal thing, that between sort of him and Brexit, there was a time that was just so hard to deal with. You thought, well, what's going to happen now? Are we on the right side? Are we on the wrong side of this? It was getting to... I found it personally exhausting.
Yeah, I did as well.
Switch off social media, around...
I'd have to do it for a living, but I didn't realise until it was finally confirmed. We came to work one morning thinking he had one. I don't know if you remember. The early indications were... that, and I think possibly that was built upon self-preservation pessimism, that idea of, oh, crikey, we better get it over with then and deal with it. But then by the end of that week, he hadn't one, and I hadn't realised how heavily it had all been weighing on my shoulders, because what we saw on January the 6th was always perhaps in the back of our minds, that fear of where will this lead? What will this escalate to? What will he be responsible for next? Well, people that we know, and certainly in my line of work, people that we breathe the same air as, are either endorsing it, cheering it, or they are apparently comfortable with it. It's terrifying.
Yeah, I mean, what sort of jacket do we have to wear today? What armour are we going to have to put up? Are we rolling over them? What does it look like? So I think now, we've thankfully, I don't know about you, but, this sort of lack of the accountability. So, stuff that the Mueller report was going and think, is this the chance where someone's finally going to, something's going to land, something's going to hit, there's going to be like, okay, this is where the line has been crossed now. And it was just, didn't happen.
And so there's a relief attached to the looking the other way. Ben Block, who is, I think, a young, if it's who I think it is, yes, he was well, anyway, was a student journalist. That's why I recognise his name. He says, I wonder if it's just because this is not news. Saying that Donald Trump incited the January 6th insurrection is up for debate nowhere in the world apart from the US. Why cover what we already know? So I'm fascinated by Republicans denying observable reality, but nowhere else in the world, and the people in this country and the people in my profession who were waving their Trump flags furiously right up until January the 6th, and some of them, of course, beyond, they've just gone silent about it. They're never going to do a mea culpa or a climb down or an apology. So you've either gone silent about it or it's cleared that what happened. So what's the point of even talking about it?
Yeah, I think that's a really strong point. Because
I didn't at first, but I do now.
That wave has crashed, and I think now the only thing, if it was going to be news, it's like, we've put him in prison for 40 years for tax fraud and all the other things.
And if he marshals his forces and is serious about a comeback, does it change then? Did we then start redirecting attention at it and saying, well, hang on a minute, look what happened last time. How can anybody even be contemplating giving this man another tilt at the White House?
Yeah, and you look at the process is going through right now, even with this, the fact that they wouldn't, dismiss him from office for the second impeachment. You just got that sense then. They're all just lining up, trying to keep them, keep themselves safe.
The Republicans who will tell the truth about what happened on January the 6th are as rare as hen's teeth. And, of course, they have become incredibly unpopular in their own party. Liz Cheney and as Adam Kinzinger. Kinzinger in particular, actually, we might round off this conversation with his testimony. Adam Kinzinger was very close to tears at one point, talking about stuff that I think we once all thought was just obvious and not up for negotiation.
Yeah.
Oh, man. No, I'll continue having conversations about it, but I think that's a powerful argument, actually, that in conjunction with the tweet I read out from Ben, just the idea, what are you going to do? You can't do this every day, And the coronavirus, of course, has filled the space available, perhaps, where we might have been talking more about this. And that is just a simple matter of priority. What's more important? An ousted fascist president or a virus that could still kill you? That's a rhetorical question, by the way. Don't text me your answers. David's in Chelsea. David, what would you like to say?
It's such a complicated issue that I don't think the media are giving it much attention because we're all fed out to the back teeth with Trump.
Yes.
It's like arguing with a lunatic. You just can't do it.
Or a pigeon. Playing chess with a pigeon was always my favourite.
Yes, you can't argue with a fool, can you?
But America is an incredibly important ally for this country. And,
I know it is.
And it is still riven with senior Republicans really worshipping at the altar of the madness.
But people want to move on with Biden. And they want to forget about Trump and forget about all these people, and giving them the oxygen of publicity is not really helping.
Well, I don't think we're giving him the oxygen of publicity by playing test. Well, we're talking more about police officers who were fearful for their lives as a result of a terrorist attack.
A terrorist attack that
he incited a terrorist attack. This would be like you saying after September the 11th we shouldn't talk about Osama bin Laden.
No, what are we going to do in Britain about Trump? Are we going to arrest him?
I don't know.
Are we going to put him on trial? What are we going to do in Britain?
What could we do about Trump when he was president? It didn't stop us talking about it. I'm bridling a bit because I feel you're querying my editorial choices, David, which is a little bit thin-skinned of me.
No, I'm just saying there's only one thing you can do with Trump, and that's put him on trial.
Yes. And we're not going to have any say at all. They don't have any say at all in that process. I suppose then I would refer you to the earlier answers that I didn't like, but which possibly answer what you're asking, which is we should talk about it for fear that we could be heading down a similar path.
I don't think Britain's anywhere near.
No, I don't either.
Trump. I mean, that's a crazy. As much as you might hate Boris Johnson and hate the Conservatives and all this, it's nothing like Trump, really.
No, I don't think it is either, but quite a lot of contributors were suggesting one reason why it needs to be talked about. So you would almost go for out of sight, out of mind then?
No, I would like Trump to be put on trial.
Right.
But I don't know how I'm going to bring it about.
Start a petition.
I mean, no, the thing is that, seriously, America needs to wake up and deal with Trump themselves.
And maybe,
they don't want to.
Well, I don't know whether or not this would have been historically a position into which we would exercise leverage, but then on who? Because it's not up to... Yeah, I take your point. I don't know what the alternative is. I don't want to stay silent because I've been so shivery listening to the testimony and wondering why we're not talking about it. And I would actually go a little further on that and say we talk about lots and lots of things in the British media over which we have no influence and over which British politicians arguably have no influence. But yeah, I mean, you could perhaps turn around to Joe Biden when he seeks to intervene on matters to do with the Good Friday Agreement, for example, and say, hang on a minute, mate, get your own house in order. You've still got a bloke running around Florida who incited a terrorist attack upon your own parliament. And so we're probably not going to take any lessons from you on Brexit. But, of course, the problem with that is that Brexit and Trump were widely viewed as being part of the same problem. And even people who like both Brexit and Trump were seeing them as being part of the same phenomenon. Thank you, David. Jenny's in Richmond-on-Thames. Jenny, what would you like to say?
Hi.
Hello.
Just a couple of things. The one thing I think that a lot of people don't talk about is the difference in education across the United States.
Yes.
When we're talking about the common man, the education you get in Texas versus Washington State is completely different.
Is it?
One state teaches creationism, another doesn't. And so the information that's handed down, to kids and throughout education is completely different. And the way that information is dissected and thought about is different. As it comes to media and politicians, I think it's 100% opportunism on both sides. The United States is quite simple. They're all trying to make a buck. And if you look at Fox News, for instance, Rupert Murdoch.
I'm always confused by Fox News. I mention it a lot, and the viewing figures do not really tally with the level of influence that I believe it must have. This validation of utterly ludicrous opinions and beliefs happening on your television screen. I never quite understand the relationship between the viewing figures and the influence.
Well, but then if you think about the fact that one vote doesn't equal one vote in the United States, it makes sense.
You mean depending on where it's cast?
Correct.
Right, yeah.
So someone who's a Fox News viewer is probably someone who is maybe in a southern state, and their vote counts for every 3 of a Democrat in California.
Yes. So it becomes super powerful in those sort of...
Correct.
What's your answer to the question of why this isn't being talked about? I don't know what but here, as someone who lives here but is from there, are you surprised at the lack of interest? Right, really?
I think if you look at the BBC, they are reliant on the government for funding.
Right.
And we've seen at the moment that
the license fee, which the government has control over, so it's not quite,
And if you look at who's been installed as some of senior heads at the BBC by the current government, there's a lot of pressure on the BBC at the moment. And while they may be a free news, as quote unquote, they're not. No one is ever 100%.
But why would reporting accurately on January the 6th upset the current UK government?
Well, why wouldn't it? I mean, I would actually disagree with one of your previous callers who said Boris Johnson isn't as scary as Donald Trump. I don't agree with that.
Gosh.
I think the British public, because of their education being not as just the word I'm looking for, it's clear across the country. There is no single state having its own idea of what should be taught.
No, that's very true.
There's much more discourse, and it's on a level with everyone. Everyone had the chance to have a very similar education and thought process and ability to deconstruct issues and have the conversation, whereas in the United States it is not that way.
Well, and it wasn't that way here until relatively recently. I mean, that's nice to hear you describing our education system in such in such glowing terms. But of course, a lot of the big political decisions taken in recent years skew quite badly according to education. So a lot of the stuff that's got over the line was supported less by the better educated people, which doesn't necessarily mean it's good or bad or right or wrong, but it is a more modern phenomenon that we've had. What you describe has still got a whole heap of problems. And Emma takes up your point. She says Donald Trump didn't seem like a Donald Trump in waiting. It wasn't Trump that was dangerous. It was the people surrounding him and using him who made him dangerous. And you can, of course, ask the same question about any politician, including the current British Prime Minister. Great calls again today. I get teased by my friend Scott for sounding a bit partridgey when I say even better than last week, the callers this week. I don't know that bit. I mean it. We have incredibly strong calls on LBC. And if you haven't heard your answer to the question of why those conversations, and I will end by, have we got the politician? Have we got the Kinzinger guy? Can we try and get that? The Republican politician Adam Kinzinger talking about the events of January the 6th, because to hear it from a Republican is really to strike home how derelict so many of his colleagues are across American politics, because what happened on January the 6th is not up for argument. So if you are Team Trump, you have no choice really to either deny that it happened or just never talk about it at all. And that's what the sort of grubby little British cheerleaders for him have elected to do. Given up trying to deny it. And I don't think many of them even tried. But let's just never mention it at all. Let's never mention it at all again. Like Basil Fawlty with the German guest at Fawlty Towers. 23 minutes after 11 is the time. Hit the numbers now. You will get through, and hopefully I'll be able to squeeze you in. Debbie's in Pembrokeshire in Wales. Debbie, what would you like to say?
Good morning, James.
Hello.
No pressure then.
No, I know. I just realised how unfair that was. Absolutely incredible calls today. Probably the best ever. Can we get through to 5:30? Here's Debbie.
Yeah, actually, one of your American callers earlier made one of the points I was going to make, which is, you'd stated that if this is happening anywhere else in the world, we'd be jumping all over it. And the fact is, it is happening all over the world, and we're not jumping all over it.
Yeah, I hadn't thought of that.
It's a really sad state of affairs, to be quite honest. But I think part of the problem is, and some of this is to do with the pandemic as well, is that we've become, I think every country in the world has become quite insular. And we're not looking at our neighbours and friends around the world. We're concentrating on us. I don't think it's a healthy way to run the governments of the world, but I do think that's where we're at the moment. Whether that will change
in this country, we are. I think you're right. I mean, as a result of a few different things, we really have had a sense of, well, we haven't pulled the drawbridge up, have we, in any sense at all, except perhaps intellectually and emotionally.
Exactly that. I mean, we probably wouldn't be in the position we're in had we pulled up the drawbridge, as it were, earlier. But, we are where we are. So
it's a bandwidth. Sorry to jump in. It's a bandwidth point. We just haven't got the bandwidth at the moment as a country to be too concerned about what's happening or what happened on the other side of the Atlantic 6 months ago.
But I think we should be.
Yeah, I do too.
I think it's really important. And I bang on about this all the time with friends who think I'm completely obsessed and mad as a hatter when I go on about Trump. I do think he is dangerous. I think he's still dangerous.
Of course he is.
And I think, but I also believe at the same time that his supporters are in the minority, but they're louder than anybody else, and they're bolshier than anybody else. And I'm afraid the Republican Party are doing everything they can because they know, the Republican Party at this moment in time know that if every election going forward is a fair and free election and everybody gets to vote, they will never get into power again. So they're doing everything they can in states like...
To finagle, I think we've just lost the line there, did we? Yep, I think we did. Doing everything they can to sort of... Is it gerrymander? I forget exactly what the correct word is. It's not filibuster. Voter suppression is the flavour of the day, which oddly enough we have had little echoes of here, haven't we? A little bit of voter suppression. Debbie, thank you. I don't know what happened to the phone line, but I hope you certainly got a lot of very good points across. Jenny's in Guildford with what will probably be the last word on this. Jenny, what's it going to be?
James, the world is in turmoil and everyone's terrified, including the media. No no one knows what's going to happen. They just know what we want to happen. We do want Trump to go to trial. But in the meantime, the media holds its breath. They don't know what to say.
Why not?
Because they're terrified that it's not going to be what they want to hear, what they want to write. Meanwhile, reality rolls on. Climate change, there's floods, there's fires. We're consumed with a lot of information about the terror in the world at the moment. And it's real. It's coming from the universe. It's not just the crazy Republicans.
Sure.
So the media doesn't know quite how to respond. How do you round up the thoughts when the entire
big
world
stuff,
is in transition?
The complicated stuff. I mean, they can still deal with the simple stuff and the really provocative, lazy stuff like refugees in dinghies, and now we've got people attacking the Royal National Lifeboat Institute, which is not something I ever thought I'd have to say live on the radio. But the really complicated stuff, whether it's climate science, whether it is America's profound flirtation with full-on fascism, or whether it is elements of the pandemic management, it's just all too complicated to contemplate, and the media has been derelict in its duty.
All of the above.
Well.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for helping us fight a small rearguard action, Jenny.
You're welcome, James.
28 after 11. Squeeze, Debbie got cut off. Just one more minute, Debbie, if you'd finished your point. I don't know.
I have no idea where I was, James.
Oh, well, that's you and me both. You and me both.
Billowing across the water in full flow.
That's the spirit. So you don't even know where you got cut off. You haven't even drawn breath. That happens to me occasionally. No, never mind. Well, we shall continue choosing our moments and talking about it. But I did want to end. Thank you, Debbie. I did want to end with that one of the precious few Republican politicians who voted to impeach Trump after the riots he incited, and his name is Adam Kinzinger.
I never expected the day to be quite as emotional for me as it has been. I've talked to a number of you and gotten to know you. I think it's important to tell you right now, though. You guys may, individually feel a little broken. You guys all talk about the effects you have to deal with, and, you talk about the impact of that day. But you guys won. You guys held. Democracies are not defined by our bad days. We're defined by how we come back from bad days, how we take accountability for that. And for all the overheated rhetoric surrounding this committee, our mission is very simple. It's to find the truth, and it's to ensure accountability. Because many in my party have treated this as just another partisan fight. It's toxic, and it's a disservice to the officers and their families, to the staff and the employees on the Capitol complex, to the American people who deserve the truth, and to those generations before us who went to war to defend self-governance. Because self-governance is at stake.
Self-governance is at stake. The words of the Republican member of Congress, Adam Kinzinger, who, well, I think probably reminds us all of why this conversation is important, even if we feel that either we haven't got the bandwidth for it or it's too terrible to contemplate. There it is.
Yes, I agree, man. It really makes it. Yeah, it's a real